Welcome everyone. Good evening and almost happy Purim. I hope everyone is fully supplied with their mishloach manot food, or if you're getting dressed up, a costume, if not wine, whatever it is that you're getting ready for Purim, we're almost there. Tonight's talk is on the topic of archaeology and the book of Esther, and most of it is based on the book and videos of a fellow named Rabbi Yehuda Landy, who put in many years of investigation into the archaeology of the book of Esther. Interestingly, a lot of the archaeology for the book of Esther can be found in the following places. Some of it is in the Met. Most of it is in the Louvre in France, and also in Chicago. The University of Chicago did a lot of the excavations in Persia, in Iran, and also you have a lot of materials in the British Museum. And then you have some scattered all kinds of different places. I think I saw some related materials. There's something called the Semitic Museum in Harvard. It's all over. But there is a lot of archaeology to the book of Esther, and there is a lot of history that comes with it. Obviously, you will not find a love letter from Achashverosh to Queen Esther, but you will find a lot of the palaces and a lot of the related paraphernalia of the era. And I don't want to spoil it, so I'll tell you everything at its own time. But before we start speaking about the archaeology, we need to acknowledge when the story of the book of Esther happens. So at what point in history does the book of Esther take place? The book of Esther is extremely important because it's the connecting link between the time of the first temple and the time of the second temple. So the story of Esther, interestingly, is both at the beginning of the first temple, but it's also part of the construction of the first temple. There's one verse two actually, sorry. There's two verses in the book of Esther that we read in a tune of Tisha B'Av, of lamentation. They say about Litvaks that this is their favorite part of Purim, where you read the story of Esther in a sad and lamenting voice, because too much joy is kind of too much for us. But what is the verse that we read in the tune of the book of Eicha? Anybody? Does anyone know when we read a verse in the book of Esther in the tune of Eicha? Yeah?
On Purim night?
Well, it's in the Megillah, so it's Purim night and Purim day. But what part of the Megillah do you read in a tune of lamentation, as if it's Tisha B'Av? Oh. What a clash. You read when we're introduced to Mordechai, we say, Asher hogla mirushalayim imagola, Asher hogleta, im Yechonia melech Yehuda. So I'm going to translate that. And again, I apologize for being a Litvak and loving that verse more than any other verse. But we say about Mordechai, who is Mordechai? He is Mordechai Asher hogla mirushalayim. He is Mordechai who was expelled from Jerusalem. With which expulsion, because there were actually two expulsions around the time of the first temple, Im Yechonia melech Yehuda, with Yechonia the king of Yehuda, Asher hegla Nebuchadnezzar melech Bavel, which was expelled by Nebuchadnezzar melech Bavel. So actually, when the first temple was destroyed, that was something that happened in stages. There were two expulsions of the Jews in Jerusalem. One is for what we would call in Yiddish the Feinschmeckers. It's called Galut HaCharash VeHaMasger. All the high society, all the people who had a profession, all the people who were sort of upper class in Jerusalem were expelled in the days of Yechonia to Babylon, where they served the king. They served in the king's court. You have the story of Daniel, Ezra, etc. All these people served in the court of the king. That is the first wave of expulsion. This is even before the temple is destroyed. Before the temple is even destroyed, you have an expulsion of all the talent from Jerusalem. Everyone is sent out. And with that comes Mr. Mordechai. He's also one of the people expelled. There's the famous midrash about that he was able to understand the two guards planning to kill King Achashverosh, Bigtan and Teresh. It says, why was he able to understand their language? Because he was a member of the Sanhedrin, the high court in Jerusalem, and to be a member of the high court, you needed to understand and be proficient in many languages, which he was. That's how he picked up the discussion about these two guards trying to kill King Achashverosh. So he's expelled in the days of who? Asher Agla, Nebuchadnezzar Melech Bavel. Nebuchadnezzar is the king of Bavel. And now we're going to get a bit into geography. Nebuchadnezzar is the king of Bavel. He expels Mordechai. How are we speaking about the Persian Empire? So why are we speaking about the Persian Empire? Because what happens is Nebuchadnezzar is a great king. He expels the Jews. He destroys the temple. He thinks he's at the top of the world. But what happens is he is then himself overtaken by the Persian Empire, who rules over him. So what happens is you have Assyria. They're the ones who come first to mess with the Jews. Then Babylon teams up with Madai, an important name you should remember because you're going to hear it a lot in the book of Esther. So Assyria is defeated by Babylon and Madai, and then Madai goes and turns to Persia, and together they defeat the Babylonians. But a lot of these empires are basically on the same territory, so it's the same house switching ownership. Obviously, some with a shift to certain, Persia's more to the east, Babylon's more to the west, but you have these different empires taking over the same swaths of land, which include Iraq, Syria, Israel, etc. So what you have is, you have now the empire of Babylon, which expelled the Jews and took the smartest and best that were in Jerusalem, was overrun by Persia. And when you overtake an empire, you also plunder everything. So they go and they plunder Nebuchadnezzar's palace in Babylon, which, by the way, is something that archaeologists dug up in the city of Nineveh. It was very sad. Does everyone remember in the news when ISIS were in power? I think it must be around 2014, 2015, and they were blowing up all these artifacts and ancient buildings. So the reason they were doing this, the reason they had what to blow up, is because there are many empires that were in that area. And so all these cities, such as the city of Nineveh, which they unfortunately were able to cause a lot of damage to, were very important in the days of these empires. So Nebuchadnezzar has his palace in Nineveh, and it goes without saying that a lot of the archaeology that was done there in the late 1800s was then taken to the cities of the empires that took them over. That's how you have so many of these objects found in the Louvre and in University of Chicago. There was a lot, it was like you got finders keepers. You got to excavate there, so you took it back. Very interestingly, a lot of the materials we're going to talk about here were found in what's today Iran. And Iran came to we'll see soon, they came to the British Museum and they said, look, we're doing this whole exhibit where we want to feature products or items that you found in our country. And the British Museum said, but if we give it to you, you're never gonna give it back to us. So why would we lend you? And I'll speak about what the object is in a second. Why would we lend it to you if you're not going to give it back to us? So they decided they'll have an exchange program, almost like a prisoner's exchange. The British Museum gave Iran on loan a whole lot of items to take for 5 years. And the Iranians gave them back also items that they could feature in the British Museum in London. And that's how we got to see a lot of these items. So in the kingdom of Persia, you have a great king. He's very nice, and his name is Cyrus the Great. And Cyrus declares famously, we read it, I believe, in the book of I can't remember, either Ezra, Nehemiah. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong. Ko amar Hashem limshicho leKoresh. God speaks to his Messiah Koresh, and Koresh says, whoever wants can go to Jerusalem and he can rebuild the house of God. Koresh was a liberal king, and that was his belief regarding many, many smaller nations. Meaning, the philosophy of emperors like Nebuchadnezzar was, you destroy a country, you destroy their temples, and you bring their populations to your own country or to a different country. That's how they are most submissive. Koresh thinks more the type of thinking that we see later with the Romans, which is let every country sort of do their own thing. Of course, the Romans have their own way of doing it, but basically let people live in their native land. and build their own temples, and that's good for business. So Koresh makes this declaration, which amazingly we have to this day. It's called the Koresh cylinder, where he declares that you can see this online. He declares on this with this writing on this cylinder. He declares that every nation should go back to its country after being expelled by Nebuchadnezzar and build their temple. And that's when Jews go and they decide they're going to rebuild the temple. So the story of the Megillah very much has to do with the tying of the first temple to the second temple. So the Jews start actually going to Jerusalem to build a temple. By the way, how many Jews do you think went to Jerusalem when it was declared that you can go back? How many, David Ben-Gurion was very disappointed by American Jews not coming in 1948. How many Jews do you think came when Ezra and Nehemiah came to Jerusalem? It wasn't so many. It was tens of thousands. A few tens of thousands came to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple. They start rebuilding the temple, and it says when they are rebuilding the temple in the days of Cyrus, the elders cried. Why? Because the elders remembered this huge, magnificent building in the times of King Solomon's temple, and now they see they're building this little tiny small temple with very few resources, and it hurts their heart to see what they're rebuilding. So they do this, but unfortunately, in the 70 years that we were not in Israel, other people came and lived there, right? Nebuchadnezzar, that was his shtick. He would move this population out and move that population in. And so the people who were moved in, called the Shomronim, Sumerians, not to be confused with the Sumerians, that's another group, they start hating on the Jews. And it's almost like a lot of times you think like, did 2,500 years not pass by? Because what do? They start sending letters to Washington, right? They start saying, look what the Jews are doing. They're rebelling against you. They start sending letters to Cyrus saying, wait, you sent these groups of Jews to build their temple in Jerusalem. They're bad for business. They're making our lives harder. They're going to rebel against you, etc., etc. And indeed, Korach ordered, I'm already thinking about Passover, Korach. But Koresh, Cyrus, says, you know what? Stop the construction of the temple. This is, according to the Jewish sources and other sources, this is when the story of Esther is happening. So if anyone asks you, when does the story of Esther happen? Does it happen during the first temple? Does it happen during the second temple? Does it happen during the 70 years that we're in Babylon? The answer is neither. It happens when we start building the temple, but we have to pause because the haters sent letters to Cyrus and say these Jews are going to rebel against you. And in fact, the Jews are not able to start rebuilding the temple until later in the day. And that's why, according to Jewish commentaries, that's also why the book of Esther is so important, because it's about how Jews are saved, but it's also about how Jews get permission to renew, to hit the start button again, to restart the construction of the second temple. So it's not the first temple, it's not the second temple, it's not the 70 years, it's the pause in the construction of the second temple.
Rabbi, how long was that pause for?
Good question. There's a lot of confusion in that. There's there's several books. It's called The Missing 50 Years. Do you hear? There's a lot of ambiguity about that time. I don't know how long it was, but let me just tell you that there were, I think, 2 or 3 kings before it was restarted. So you have Cyrus, Darius, Achashverosh. There's also a debate in the secular literature who comes first, but Achashverosh rules for about 14 years. So it's fair to say that we're talking about at least 14 or so at least 20 years of a pause between the construction of the 2 temples, of the second temple.
It was my understanding that actually, maybe Esther and Achashverosh had a son, and
he restarted. Yeah, so there's also that the son, another Darius, was the one who allowed the reconstruction of the temple. But either way, that's a product of the story of Esther.
Yeah.
So what a lot of people don't realize is that the book of Esther is a book both about diaspora, survival, but it's also about Israel revival. It's also about the resumption of the building of the second temple. And so that's the significance it has for the people of Israel in terms of starting to build the temple. Now, Achashverosh is the king. You'll see a lot of times mentioned Chel Paras Umadai. There's a mention of Persia and Media, not media like social media, media like the kingdom of Madai. And the reason is because Madai, after they joined Babylon to defeat the Assyrians, now they're joining power with the Persians, and the Persians give them equal representation. So if you look at the ancient stones, you'll see different people with different hats. I don't know if anyone has ever seen one of those. Has anyone ever seen those tablets where you can see inscriptions of soldiers from ancient Persia or Babylon? They have these different kinds of square hats or whatever it may be. So there's equal representation to the different types of hats, and that's because Madai and Paras share power. So that explains to you why throughout the Megillah there's a mentioning of Paras and Madai. Now, Achashverosh is famous not only among us, but also among the Greeks. Why is Achashverosh famous among the Greeks? And why do we have so much documentation about him? Because in a way, it's like he's rewarded for his bad deeds. Achashverosh went to fight a war against the Greeks. He actually burnt Athens down. He got that far, but he lost. So the Greek historian Herodotus, forgive me, Greeks, if I if I didn't pronounce it correctly, Herodotus, he writes a lot.
Herodotus.
Sorry, what's the name?
Herodotus.
Herodotus.
Yeah.
So Herodotus writes a lot about this fellow named Achashverosh, which the Greeks changed his name to Xerxes. And actually, if you look at all the archaeology, his name is Chashiarish. So we call him Achashverosh, the Greeks call him Xerxes, but his name is Chashiarish. And he
Xerxes.
I'm sorry?
Xerxes in Greek.
In Greek, yes, but in the archaeology and in whatever they spoke then, it was Chashiarish. So he goes and he's described in the Greek literature as someone who is drunk. He's always drinking wine. He's always with women, and he's married. Interestingly, and I don't want to speculate here, but the name of his wife is a mistress, which kind of sounds like Esther. It has the letters, maybe yes, maybe no. But the Achashverosh that we see in the Greek history very much overlaps with the Achashverosh we know from the children's plays and the Megillah, who's kind of a drunk and hanging out all the time. Now, another interesting thing is if you look at the Megillah, what year is the party that Achashverosh makes? The party that he makes, does anyone remember? It's early on in the Megillah. The party that he makes, it says, Bishnat Shalosh Lemolcho, in the third year of his reign. Why? Because it's likely it wasn't a simple thing for him to be king. Rather, there were always these wars, and that's number one. Number two is, it says, I'm going to mention this more later, it says that he goes to a war with Greece, and the next story where he finds Esther is, I believe, in the year 12 to his reign. I'll mention it later. But basically, there's this gap in the book of Esther, and everyone wonders what he's doing in this gap time between when he kills Vashti and when he marries Esther. And the answer is that's really when he's going to fight with Athens. All right, that's the story of.
Rabbi,
yes.
Can I ask a question? Was this all taking place in Persia? Like you said, there was a Babylonian exile. The Jews
Excellent
went to
question.
Iraq.
All right, so
especially,
my answer is especially to those who are online and watching from home, but I'm going to do my best, so even just by listening, you'll be able to sort of imagine it. There's two places you can even look today on Google Maps and find everything about this story. One is the city of Shush, or Susa, which is in Iran today. Shush is close to the border of Iraq, and you can really see very vividly what's going on there. And the other is a place called Persepolis. Persepolis is actually the original Persia. The name Persia comes from this palace in a place called Persepolis. Both were extensively dug in the 1800s, some by whoever, as I said, it was finders keepers basically. So the first person to dig was a French archaeologist, and so he sent whatever findings he had to the Louvre. You had in Persepolis also someone from the University of Chicago digging. They sent their materials to Chicago. Whatever the British could get, they also took. But yeah, the places where the story is happening are both available. You can see in incredible detail the magnificence of these palaces. You can see it online. You can listen now and I'll describe it to the best of my ability. But basically, Ahasuerus has two magnificent palaces. One is Persepolis, aka Persia, and the other is Shush, or Susa, aka Shushan, which incidentally is attached to what's called in Iran the Tomb of Daniel. So the place where Daniel the prophet is buried, that's also right there.
Wow, thank you.
Sorry?
Thank you.
Yeah, so these are the two places. So Cyrus captures Babel. Now, when you capture something, as I said, you plunder it, you take it all to the place where you're coming from. And that's what Cyrus does. He takes over the city of Nebuchadnezzar, and he brings it all with him to his Persian palaces, mainly in Persepolis. The next thing that happens is, I mentioned to you the cylinder that Cyrus writes that all people can go back. Cyrus writes that all people can go and live in their countries. So that was in the hands of the British Museum, and the Iranians really wanted to show it. So in exchange for the British sending it to Iran, first the Iranians lent the Persians a whole lot of gold and silver plates that were put at the foundations of these buildings. And so we have a copy of the founding documents of these buildings. So in those days, when I actually don't know what the logic behind it is, I personally would not do this, but if you're building a building, you write, this is in Akkadian writing, you write on a big silver plate, I, the glorious so-and-so, am building this building here and here with all my achievements, and then you put it at the foundation. So what happens is a lot of these documents that are found, and by documents I mean big silver and gold plates, they were sent by Tehran to London, and London in exchange sent to Iran the Cyrus cylinder. I want to tell you something very interesting. In 1971, this is a fascinating twist of history. In 1971, the Shah, who was the modern ruler of Persia, he decided he would have a magnificent march marking Persian history, and he did it in this place called Persepolis. Now, he wanted to replicate the great wealth and the treasures that were in Persepolis, and you can look this up online also. He dressed people exactly the way they would be dressed in the times of the Persian Empire, and he said, we're celebrating 2,500 years for the Persian Empire. Now, very much like Ahasuerus in his time, he decided to show the great wealth of Persia. But the sad part is, historically, and this is modern history, the sad part is because it was such a materialistic extravaganza, it fed into the narrative that the Iranian people believed, which is that the Shah is stealing their money, he's too corrupt, he's too materialistic. And lo and behold, what is it, 7 years later, 1978, where you have the Iranian Khomeini revolution, which led to what it led. But the point is, this palace in Persepolis, if you see the pictures of the magnificence of the huge pillars and the stone and the tablets and the gold and silver that was found there, it's truly, truly, truly magnificent. And you can imagine what was going on. And we're going to go into the details of what you see in that palace and how it really corresponds to so much of the psukim you see in Megillat Esther, Mordechai Yoshev B'Shar HaMelech, Beit HaNashim. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but one of the things that they find already in the 1800s is they find in this palace in Shush, what do you think they find that is sort of related to the Megillah? They found countless bottles or remaining of bottles of perfumes, women's perfumes. What does it say in the Megillah? That they would go shisha chodashim b'shemen hamor babesamim, right? So they find these remainders of bottles of perfume in this palace in Shush. Again, I encourage you now, later, if you can, to go and look at this palace in Shush. It's on Google Maps, Google Earth. You can really, really feel like you're in there. Now, another very important point, Shushan and Persepolis, one is a winter palace and one is a summer palace. Based on your knowledge, or based on really anything, which one do you think was the summer palace and which one do you think was a winter palace? What do you think was the summer palace? What do you think was the winter palace? Persepolis is the bigger, fancier, extravagant one that's a bit more to the west, as opposed to, I'm sorry, that's more to the east, as opposed to Shushan or Shush, which is closer to the border of Iraq. Which one is the winter and which one is the summer? So the answer is, what's happening now? It snowed today, yeah? So this should give you a clue. It snowed today, so we celebrate Purim in the winter. So Shushan is the winter palace. And in fact, if you look at all the dates in the Megillah, and there are many dates, it's all in the same half a year of the winter. Why? Because in the summer, it's like when you go to Brooklyn in the summer and everyone's in the Catskills. So basically, in the summer, Achashverosh is not to be found in Shushan. It's too hot. It has the Iraqi climate. And that's when he's more in the, anyone ever see pictures of Iran where you have snow-topped mountains? There's some cooler areas there. So that he's doing more in the winter. So it's interesting. We celebrate Purim in the winter, and all the dates in the Megillah are in the winter because Shushan is in fact the winter palace, and that's why he's hanging out, and that's why he's spending his time in this area. It's interesting. The Tomb of Cyrus, another place you can look up that exists to this day. It's in a city called Pasargad in Iran, and it stands to this day. Unfortunately, despite Cyrus being a nice guy and writing us the letter, he ruled only for 5 years. And unfortunately, even though we give him a lot of credit for allowing the construction of the Beit HaMikdash, unfortunately, he accepted the hate letters from the Sumerians and he stopped the construction of the Beit HaMikdash. Yeah, basically he's remembered in a very good way. All right, another thing that is interesting to find is in Egypt. Why in Egypt? Because, believe it or not, the Jews assimilate and integrate into Persian society, and they serve in the Persian army. And while the Jews serve in the Persian army, they are stationed in all kinds of places. One of the places that they are stationed is an island in Egypt, and in the Nile River. There's an island in the Nile River, and there's a letter from Persia, from the headquarters, written in Assyrian handwriting, which today we call Hebrew, and it's written also in Aramaic, because Aramaic was a language Jews speak a lot. And it says, make sure that the Jewish soldiers have their matzahs for Passover. This is before the time of the Second Temple. So it just shows you how the Jews were integrated throughout the empire, which is exactly what happens in the story of the Megillah. Haman is making sure not only to destroy the Jews in Persia, but he's sending letters all over the empire to make sure that the Jews are destroyed all over the empire, because in fact, the Jews are all over the empire. And as it says in the Megillah, and again, this is something we see in archaeology, Medina kichtava, ve'am ve'am kilshono. Every nation according to its writing, and every nation according to its language. What does that mean? And it wasn't always like that. What does it mean? You can write with English letters, you can write Arabic. How? You just write the way it sounds. You can write with English. You write already in English letters, Spanish, French. I don't know why I call them English letters. Whoever is the original claim on the letters, right? So you can write Spanish, French, etc. So when the Persian Empire writes letters, it does it in two ways. Number one, it writes it in your language, like they write to these Jewish soldiers. The Jewish soldiers, they're writing to them in their handwriting and the language that they're speaking Aramaic. But also there's this Akkadian writing that's the easiest one that all these Sumerian tablets that we find are written in. I know how to say it in Hebrew easily, Ktav Yetedot, where basically you have straight lines. It's like the Hammurabi writings. It's all these like straight lines, easy to write and easy to keep on a stone. And you can also write in different languages using the primary Persian language. All right, another interesting picture that you have, fascinating picture that's found in Persepolis, is of a king sitting on a throne. And historians argue which one is Ahasuerus and which one is his son, but they're both confirmed to be there. And he's holding a stick that's huge. It's like from here, it's like probably 6 feet. He's holding it. And what is it? It's the royal scepter. Remember the story with Esther having to touch the scepter if she's not otherwise she gets killed if he doesn't give her the scepter. So there's this famous tablet which they found in Persepolis where the historians, archaeologists believe it's King Ahasuerus and Darius. There's a whole machloket debate. Who's who, who's standing, who's sitting, whose reign it is. But the king always sits with this huge scepter. It's not like Queen Elizabeth's elegant 1 foot scepter. No, this is a big in all the kids pictures they have King Ahasuerus handing to Queen Esther like a magic wand. No, this is like something that he's sitting with and he holds it. And this is Sharvit Azav, and this is found in Persepolis. Interestingly, a lot of the archaeologists that ended up there in the 1800s relied on the writings of a Jewish man. I think I mentioned him when we spoke about the Jews in China. His name was Rabbi Binyamin Metudela. There's even a street named for him in Rechavia, I think. Basically, Binyamin Metudela is a Jew in the 1300s who travels around the world and documents Jewish life wherever it is. And he documents that in this and this area in Persia, people have a tradition this was the place of the palace of Ahasuerus. And lo and behold, there obviously we're Jewish. We couldn't have had one tradition. There were people who believed this and there were people who believed that. But that's where the French archaeologist then later goes on and he digs there and he finds it. Interestingly, when you go to these palaces, both Shushan and in Persepolis, you'll see something very interesting. You'll see a concept called Sha'ar HaMelech. We say Mordechai Yoshev B'Sha'ar HaMelech. What does that mean? It means Mordechai is sitting. Where's he sitting? In the gate of the king. How do you imagine that? No one here read the kids' books about how the Mordechai is sitting? No one saw those pictures, the cartoons. So basically, you see a picture of Mordechai Yoshev B'Sha'ar HaMelech, that Mordechai is sitting on the gate. Come on, does anyone know the story where he's watching out for Esther? He goes every day. Do people remember that? So Sha'ar HaMelech is not a gate because it makes no sense that everyone should huddle under this gate. Sha'ar HaMelech is this huge reception hall. It's almost like if you've ever been to Congress or even the Supreme Court, there's these big halls before you come in where people can congregate. So Sha'ar HaMelech, when it says Mordechai Yoshev B'Sha'ar HaMelech, it doesn't mean he's under the door lintel or something. It means he's sitting in this hall called Sha'ar HaMelech, which is the gate of the king, but it's really a huge reception hall where you would come and wait for the king. Now, interestingly, this is a mistake that came into our understanding from modern Hebrew. In modern Hebrew, by the way, one of my favorite commercials, when you come to Jerusalem, there used to be, and I don't want to advertise, just to be clear, we don't have any beer companies sponsoring this class, but when you come to Jerusalem, they used to have the sign, Habira Hatova Ba'olam. Now, bira means beer. Okay, that's from whatever. But Bira means a capital city, the capital city. So it used to be, there was first a beer company that used to advertise Habira Hatova Ba'olam, the best beer in the world. Then Jerusalem, the municipality, said, why should we let the beer people steal that idea? Let's take it, and they put the sign, Habira Hatova Ba'olam, the best capital city. But modern Hebrew, Bira means a capital city. However, we refer to Shushan as Shushan Habira. Does that mean Shushan is the capital city? The answer is 100% no. Shushan is not the capital city. Persepolis is the capital city, and that's where all the treasures are. Not all, but many of the treasures are. Bira, and it's mentioned with regard to Avram Avinu, is a big, big tower. Shushan HaBira, big building. Remember this, Rashi says with Avram Avinu, he looks at the Bira, he looks at the building. Bira means a large building. So when we speak about Shushan HaBira, we're not saying Shushan, the capital city, we're actually saying Shushan, the palace. That is Shushan HaBira. It means Shushan, the palace, the large building. And when you come to Shushan HaBira, Shushan, the large building, that is where you have Shar HaMelech, a huge, huge reception hall, and then you have a chatzera. There's so many mentions of rooms, and when you look, you can look even on the satellite images today of this area. You can see there's multiple reception rooms. You have mentioned in the Megillah, you have Chatzar Beit HaMelech HaChitzona, HaPnimit. There's different courts. There's even Beit HaNashim, where it says there's the house where the women lived. There's even that. I don't want to get into American conspiracy theories or the way they're mentioned, but there's this whole thing with Marilyn Monroe. How did she get into the White House? The Beit HaNashim was connected directly to the room of the king in this, and that you can see to this day. The Beit HaNashim is connected directly to the king's rooms. So that is all these rooms exist. Beit HaNashim. Interestingly, there's a word in Aramaic called an apadna, which means a palace, which is the name of the Shushan. This I saw on Google Maps today. They still call it an apadna, which is a word in the Talmud. But the apadna is this area where he also has a reception of guests. So the bottom line is we have many, many, many different treasures that were found in the area of Shushan and Shush, which confirm, but whether it's by writing or by different types of evidence, this was the palace of Achashverosh. Interestingly, one of the first psukim you say at the Megillah is Chor Karpasu Tchelet Achuz V'Chavlei Butz V'Argaman Al Glilei Kesef Ve'Amudei Shesh. Amudei Shesh means pillars made out of marble. What's left today in the palace, besides for the floors and stuff like that? You have these huge Amudei Shesh that are still there at the basin, and the heads of these pillars are in the Louvre. And just by how the crown of the pillar looks, you can imagine how absolutely large these very large pillars were. I see we're short on time, so I want to mention a few more very important things. The mail system you have today, your mailman comes, he gives it to you. Where did that all begin in human history? This is a secular general information. Where does mail come from? So the first empire that has an extensive mail system is the Persian Empire. We got it from the Persians. And so you have repeatedly throughout the Megillah, Haratzim yatzud chufim bidvar hamelach, the horsemen go urgently with the word of the king, and the Persians have this whole system of how you get the mail from one country to the other. They are the architects of mail. And interestingly, also something related to the Megillah, in this palace in Persepolis, you also have large areas for the horses, because that's how you get the mail out. And that is also something that's directly related to how we see in the Megillah that there's constant letters being sent, right? You have to send the letter of Haman to destroy the Jews, and then you need the letter canceling it, and you need the letter giving them another time permission. So that's another thing that's important to know. One thing that will astonish you, and I'm going to describe it so you don't have to see it, but if you want to see it, you can also see this online. Absolutely amazing. Hashtiya kadat en ones. The drinking of wine at Achashverosh's party is as you wish. No one, as is traditional, no one will force you to drink. Now, if you say that, that means there are situations where you are forced to drink. And indeed, you have these cups that survive from these palaces from this time, cups that are really, really, really large, about a half a gallon or so, and they're made out of gold. And it says, the Greeks write how absolutely terrifying the experience was for them, because when you went to this party with the Persians, you were given this jug of wine, and it's in gold or silver, which doesn't make the wine taste better, actually makes it taste worse. And it's not wine. You used to always mix water with wine just to make sure it wasn't too strong. It was never weakened. And you were expected when you came to this meeting to drink it from top to bottom. And so when it says that in this Achashverosh party, Hashtiya Kedat Enones, it's actually a bonus, because it comes to say that no one is going to force you, because usually when you come there, you're going to be forced. In fact, the Greeks write a lot about how lavish some of these Persian parties were in terms of the same things we hear, mitot kesef, zahav, etc. I just want to speak one more thing, because there's a lot more to cover, but not enough time, and that is the concept of killing Vashti. Killing Vashti, obviously, we don't have any archaeological documentation. However, Alexander the Great marries the daughter of Cyrus. Not the first one, but here, if I get the name exactly, Alexander marries, Roxanne, but she has, so her name is Statria, the wife of Alexander. She's the daughter of Darius III. She is poisoned to death. And so it's not uncommon in that time to see people marrying from another empire for the sake of peace. But unfortunately, that's what King Solomon was doing. But unfortunately, what you also see is someone who became king or established their power by marrying the daughter of another empire, then ending up poisoning their own wife to death in order to make sure that then they establish their dominance in a very, very strong way. If you want to go to the Metropolitan Museum right here and see some of the items, there's Ritzpot Bahat. It's a specific kind of stone that you could see there. A lot of the items can be seen when you see items about the Persian Empire, about the Babylonians, right here in the Metropolitan Museum. If you want to travel a little bit more, go to Chicago, where you can see also, actually in Yale, which is not so far, it's called a Puru. Puru sounds like Purim. Why is Purim called a Purim? Because of the dice, the lot that he drew. You can find this Puru, which is what they call the Puru, the dice that he rolled in order to decide the 13th of Adar. You can also find that. It's actually in Yale, in New Haven, also from the same time. There's a lot more. And really, I encourage everyone to look on Google Images, Google Maps. You can see these places, Persepolis, Shush, and it's absolutely amazing how you can relive the story of the Megillah by seeing where these things happen.
Germany, to the Pergamon Museum.
Yeah.
The Gates of Ishtar.
The Gates of Ishtar, is that from the Megillah? From Baghdad. Yeah, a lot of these items were plundered in the 1800s. Even, by the way, from Jerusalem, one of our own items was stolen. Does anyone know what I'm talking about? The tablet of Hezekiah, where they carved in the tunnel, where the exact description of basically what's described in the Bible, where they dug a tunnel through the rock during, did anyone ever do that hike where you walk, it's under Jerusalem? So they have an inscription where they write, we met each other, and it was completed. The Ottoman Empire, Turkey, took it, and it's always a topic of diplomatic discussion of them returning it to Jerusalem, because now it's also in Istanbul. But that's one of the issues there. I see just a quick question. I'm going to answer the questions here we got on Zoom. How do the rabbis or Chazal feel about the temple being built by the Jews? I guess Elefante, meaning the Jews who originally built it. Well, there were multiple stages, so I don't know if there's any multiple recordings. I'm sorry, I don't know if there's one discussion of who built it. The name of the Persian island, which, by the way, you can also look up on Google Maps if you want, right now or later. I'm going to spell it. Whoever wants to look up the island, it's fascinating. It's called the Yiv Island. So in Hebrew, it's just spelled Yud Bet. In English, it's Yeiv. The Yiv Island in the Nile. You can see it still. You can even see the letter that was sent to the Jewish soldiers who were stationed on the Yiv Island. But once Egypt defeated the Persians, they went back home to Persia because they were there as keeping Persian power. And it's true. I see here also another true thing. They built a temple. These Jewish soldiers built a temple for Hashem on this island. This is true. These are all things you can look up. But Bezrat Hashem, most importantly, we should be blessed with a happy Purim. It should be a happy Purim with quiet and safety in Israel and peace for everyone. Bezrat Hashem, a happy Purim to all, and enjoy. Happy Purim. Thank you.